Thankfully, I don't remember much about high school. But one of the days that is like seared into my brain forever is the day in biology where we were forced to watch a video of a woman giving birth. That is forever with me, I think. Now, as horrifying as that was for me as a sophomore in high school, strangely enough, though, it did kind of help me years later when my kids were born, okay? Because of that video in high school, I kind of knew what to expect. And so it did help me. Now, today we come to Daniel chapter 8. And Daniel 8 is something like a birthing video. Okay? It is. You'll see what I mean. It is a shocking look at the future, but it's also pretty helpful. Pretty helpful. It prepares us for what's ahead. And so, let's get to it, shall we? So, if you're new with us, we've been going through the book of Daniel week by week. And so now we come to Daniel chapter 8. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter to you. So this chapter is broken into two parts. So the first half of Daniel 8 is Daniel just describing the vision of the future that he has, okay? The second half, an angel comes to him. It's the angel Gabriel, comes to Daniel and then explains the vision to him, all right? So I'm going to read that second half. And so we're going to start with verse 19 in Daniel chapter 8, and then we'll read through the end. So if you don't have a Bible with you this morning, it's okay. The verses will be on the screen behind me. Let's look at Daniel 8, and then we'll start with verse 19. This is the angel Gabriel speaking here. Verse 19, he said, I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. The four horns that replaced the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. The vision of the evenings and mornings that has been given to you is true, but seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. I, Daniel, was worn out. I lay exhausted for several days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. This is God's word. All right, so we're in our 9th week now in the book of Daniel. And so if you've been with us through that whole time up to this point, maybe by now you've forgotten why in the world we're even reading this book. So let me help you out, and let's remember the main theme of the book of Daniel. Okay? The main theme is this: all believers are in exile in this world. Okay? That's the main theme. Like Daniel, we too live in Babylon. Okay? We are citizens of God's kingdom, yes, but we live on a planet that does not recognize his rule. And so the narrative thread of exile, interestingly enough, is actually woven throughout the entire Bible. The theme of exile runs from Genesis all the way through Revelation. Now, here in our book, for this sermon series, is a literal exile. Okay, it occurs in the book of Daniel, and it begins in the 6th century. That's when the kingdom of Babylon comes and destroys the kingdom of Judah. They destroy the city of Jerusalem. They lead the people then of Judah captive back to their pagan city of Babylon. Okay, now Daniel is one of those captives. Okay, He was captured by the Babylonians and taken back to the royal palace to serve the pagan king there. And so his entire adult life is lived in Babylon, in exile. Now, if we were to fast forward from this story about 600 years to the time of Jesus, we would learn that by that time, the people of Israel are back in Jerusalem. Okay, so they're back by the time Jesus arrives on the scene. They rebuilt the city. It's pretty nice now. Okay, they rebuilt the temple of God. It's pretty nice now. Okay, so everything's cool, right? Well, there's something interesting. When you flip to the New Testament, you see, okay, the city's back, the temple's back, everything's back to normal. But you find something very interesting in the way that the Israelites talk. They still claim to be exiles. Isn't that kind of odd? They still say that they're exiles, but wait a minute, you're back. You're back in Jerusalem. Why would you say that you're still exiles? In fact, by Jesus' time, the idea of exile had become a way of understanding the entire world. And friends, you and I are still experiencing the same thing here today. The Jews were onto something. They figured something out in their exile. They realized that we're all in exile. You and I are still in exile today. We are living with the painful consequences of sin, both our sin and those around us. We are all longing for a home that feels just out of our reach. And so then, friends, Daniel's story is our story. It's the same story. And that is the context of Daniel chapter 8. Daniel was a very young man when the book began, a young teenager, but by now in Daniel 8, he's an old man. He's in his middle to upper 80s probably here. He's an old man now. And at this point, Babylon is still thriving. Okay, so scholars say that the city of Babylon might actually be the greatest city to ever exist. It's a spectacular, beautiful, powerful city. And at this point in time, it's still thriving. It's still good. It has yet to be conquered by the Persians. It will soon. But at this moment in time, it's not been conquered yet. It's still thriving. And it's at this moment that Daniel gets this vision of the future. And that begs the question then, why? Why at this moment in time does Daniel get this vision? And what exactly does this vision reveal to Daniel and to us? Well, let's dive in. So point number 1 in your outline. The first thing it reveals is a progression. A progression. What do I mean? Well, if you were here last week, so we saw that chapter 7 has good news and bad news, right? It had both. So the bad news is our exile on this planet will continue until the very end. That's the bad news. Our exile continues. The good news is our king will overcome. Our king will put an end to all evil, and he will wipe every tear from every eye. That's the good news. So, chapter 7 had good news and bad news. Now we flip to chapter 8, and it's pretty much all bad news. It's just bad news in this chapter, pretty much. And the bad news is laid out for us here in graphic detail. Probably more detailed than you even realized. So, in fact, many scholars today think that Daniel 8 is so specific and accurate in its predictions of historical events that it could not possibly have been written by Daniel. Okay? They don't believe there's any way Daniel wrote this because it's far too accurate in regards to historical events. But it seems to me, and it has seemed to the historical church, that, if God is powerful enough to, let's say, bring the entire universe into existence out of nothing, then he's probably powerful enough to see the future a few hundred years into the future for Daniel, right? So it doesn't boggle my mind that this could be Daniel, because the reason that modern scholars don't believe Daniel wrote this is because they have a presupposition in their own brains that says miracles can't happen. God cannot speak about the future to human beings. But I don't share that presupposition. I believe God can and has done that. Okay? So, I believe that this is Daniel speaking here about very specific, extraordinarily specific historical events, and I believe he wrote this about 400 years before they happened. And so let's go through them. All right, so let's see this progression here. So the first thing Daniel sees in his vision is a ram. Okay? He sees a ram with two horns. That's mentioned in verse 3. And the ram just kind of runs around the earth, just knocking things over and destroying everything in its path. Okay? That's what the ram does. And nobody can stop the ram. The ram just keeps destroying everything in its path. Nobody can stop him until the flying goat appears. I told you this story is weird. The flying goat appears, okay? And he comes out of the west, and we see in the vision that he just flies around the whole earth. And the vision that Daniel had says he never even touches the ground. He just flies like around the whole earth like this, okay? And that is to show his great speed, tremendous speed. And we're actually told specifically in verse 21, if you notice that, it says that this flying goat is the Greek Empire. Okay? The Greek Empire. Now, and then we see that this flying goat has a single horn. It's like a unicorn goat. Okay? Flying unicorn goat. I told y'all Daniel was weird. The book of Daniel's weird. So it's got a single horn like this. It's flying around the earth like crazy fast. Never it touches the ground. It's got this great speed, right? It's got this single horn. And the text tells us that single horn is a single king, okay? The ruler of the Greek Empire. Do you all know who that single king is? He is Alexander the Great. You knew it. He knew it. I should have called on you. Alexander the Great is who that is, okay? In fact, what's remarkable about this is that Daniel's description of Alexander the Great and his empire is exactly correct. It's exactly correct, right? So Alexander the Great conquered the entire known world in record time, okay? It only took him about 10 years to conquer the whole world, okay? It's probably why they call him Alexander the Great, because this is pretty great. Like, this is amazing that he was able to do this, right? Just a remarkable, incredible feat. He moved with his army with lightning speed. He conquered the entire known world, and then he dropped dead. He just dropped dead. Out of nowhere. We don't really know what happened there. He just mysteriously dropped dead. I would say maybe after fighting the whole world for 10 years, he just got nothing left after that, and he just dropped dead. So that's what happened to that's exactly what happened to Alexander the Great. That's exactly what's predicted here in the text. Exactly what's predicted. Because if you look in our text, in Daniel's vision, it says that 4 horns rose up and took the place of that one horn. Okay? So 4 little horns came up out of the head of the goat. And we know from historical accounts that that is exactly what happened after Alexander the Great died. 4 generals rose up to take over and lead the kingdom. Okay? So 4 generals rose up, and what we know from history is that there's all kind of drama between them. All kinds of fighting of who's going to rule, who's going to take over, who's in charge, that kind of thing. So what ended up happening is they really kind of separated the kingdom, the Greek kingdom, into 4 separate areas that each of them would rule. Okay, which is exactly what's predicted in the text here. The text also makes it clear that none of them were as powerful as the one horn. So none of them could equal the greatness of Alexander the Great. Until, if you read in verse 9, you'll see that another horn grew out of one of those 4 horns. And we're actually given a good amount of information about this little horn. We know him in history as Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes. And so we're told in verse 23 that we just read that Antiochus is a man of tremendous wisdom and power. Tremendous wisdom and power. Enough to rival Alexander the Great. And so in verse 24, we learn that this is not just his own power, though. Okay? As we learned last week in Daniel 7, that world powers are puppets. that have greater spiritual demonic forces behind them that are pulling the strings. That's exactly the case with Antiochus, but he doesn't realize that. So Antiochus is very busy patting the old back. He thinks he's the reason for his greatness, but the text makes it clear that he's not the reason for his greatness. There are forces at work behind him, pulling the strings, okay? And he does some very, very, very terrible things, okay? So in verse 10, we read that Antiochus casts some of the heavenly hosts to the ground, some of the stars to the ground. What does that mean? It means that Antiochus is going to slaughter the people of God. Okay, the stars represent the people of God. And so Antiochus is going to slaughter the Hebrews. He's going to overthrow their temple in Jerusalem. And so how does all this stuff play out in real life, in history? Well, let me read to you a few verses from 1 Maccabees. Y'all familiar with 1 Maccabees? So that's an apocryphal book. It's not in our Bibles, but it is an historical record of the Jews, and it contains a lot of the historical record of the atrocities of King Antiochus. Okay? And so let me read just a few of these verses to you. All right? Here's what happened. This is the year 168 BC. The king erected the abomination of desolations upon the altar of the burnt offerings. And in the surrounding cities of Judah, they built pagan altars. They also burned incense at the doors of houses and in the streets. Any scrolls of the law that they found, they tore up and burned. Whoever was found with a scroll of the covenant, and whoever observed the law, was condemned to death by royal decree. In keeping with the decree, they put to death women who had their children circumcised, and they hung their babies from their necks. Their families also, and those who had circumcised them, were killed, and very great wrath came upon Israel. These are the horrors of King Antiochus. Now, these atrocities did not drop down out of the sky onto Israel out of the blue, did they? No. God had told them this was going to happen through his prophet Daniel more than 350 years beforehand. And he told them that it would happen. This is very important. He told them that it would happen as a result of a long progression of sin. So that's what the progression is of point number one. A long progression of sin that finally culminated in the terrible reign of King Antiochus. In fact, we see it in verse 23. Verse 23 says, "When the transgressors have reached their limit, then a king of bold face shall arise." See? And so King Antiochus is not an anomaly, all right? He's not just some self-made tyrant that comes out of nowhere. No. He is the fruition of humanity's sinfulness. He is the culmination of our depravity. You see, friends, our sin, it wreaks havoc on the earth. It just does. And just because you don't see the consequences of your sin immediately, doesn't mean it isn't having an effect. The effects of today's sins may not be felt for centuries, but they will be felt on the earth. And therefore, it is by God's grace that men like Antiochus don't dominate the earth all the time. It's grace. It is by his grace that he restrains this kind of evil. It's by his grace that the reign of Antiochus was short-lived. Thank God. It is also by God's grace that this horror was foretold. See, his people were prepared for this horror. And so that is the first point. Sin does not flatline. It's like a snowball running downhill. Okay? It progresses. Sin and its effects get worse and worse and worse. And it culminated here with the reign of King Antiochus. That's point number one. Point number two, this vision shows us provision. Provision. What do I mean? Well, the second thing we see here in this vision is that God provides for his people in this sinful world. In their pain, even in their own sin, God provides. And hey, look, maybe you're wondering to yourself, when you read these sort of predictive prophecies, you're like, hey, this is pretty neat. Why doesn't God do this all the time? Like, this would be super cool if I had something like this just to hang on to. Like, maybe I wake up every day, there's like a Post-it note on my mirror from God. It says, hey, here's what's going to happen at work today. Here's what's going to happen when you get home. Here's what your kids are what's going to go through. That would be super neat if I just knew all this in advance. And so why doesn't God do this more? This would be super cool if I knew the future. Actually, first of all, I'd like to say I don't think it would be as cool as you think. I don't think it'd be as neat as you think it is. I think God agrees with that. And so he doesn't do that actually for your good. It seems that God has a very special reason for this, okay? So we do see some predictive prophecies in the Old Testament, but they're pretty rare. There's not just hundreds of them, okay? They're pretty rare. And so what we see in the Scriptures is that these specific, this level of specificity about the future is only given when the future is particularly harsh and difficult, okay? So when the future is going to be like extraordinarily painful, God gives a predictive prophecy about it, okay? And this is a way of equipping His saints to endure extreme hardship, okay? And so, for example, that's really what the book of Revelation is all about. And so I know the book of Revelation has been virtually mutilated in the modern world to mean all these weird, bizarre things. And that is really a tragedy because the book of Revelation is such a beautiful book when it's seen for its true purpose. So the true purpose of the book of Revelation is to bring comfort to sufferers. Okay, that is the purpose of the book, is to bring comfort to sufferers. It is a tremendous suffering to sufferers when you read the book of Revelation to see two extraordinary things. Number one, that God Himself, His very own Son, suffers too. He suffers with you. The main character in the book of Revelation, the hero of the book of Revelation, is a slain lamb. Right? That's the hero of the book. That is comforting. God Himself knows what it's like to suffer like I suffer. That's comforting. Number two, comfort of the book of Revelation is that the Lamb overcomes all forces of pain, our enemies, hell, the devil, etc. He conquers them all. That's a heck of a comfort. Both of those things are tremendous comforts to us when we suffer. And so things like this are given as special gifts by God. They're provisions. God provides for us these little hints of hope that He is in control of all things. And so not only does Revelation encourage sufferers, this is what Daniel 8's for, to encourage sufferers, right? And so if you look at the end of the chapter, it's kind of interesting. So we have Daniel, the great interpreter of dreams. Look, and put the last verse up there. Look at what it says, verse 27. Look what he says. He says, I don't have a clue what this vision means. Look at it. He says, I, Daniel, was worn out. I lay exhausted for several days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. So here's Daniel the Revelator. He ain't got a clue what this vision is about. Even after the angel has explained it to him, he's like, I still don't get it, dude. I don't get it. But think about it. How could he? These are events 400 years in the future. He has no concept of something like Alexander the Great or the Greek Empire. Like, he has no way to compute that, okay? And it's because the vision isn't for him. This vision is not given for, it's given to Daniel. It's not given for Daniel, right? And so Daniel didn't know what it meant because he wasn't supposed to know what it means. It doesn't matter for him. It matters for his descendants. And that's why the angel says, seal it up. Seal up the vision. Now, this doesn't mean hide it. It means protect it. Protect the vision at all costs. This is very, very important that you protect this, Daniel, because this is going to encourage sufferers. This is going to be helpful to my people one day. So please protect it, because it's not for you, it's for generations from now. There are saints coming who are going to need it. And so, this is like a big cosmic birthing video. As a sophomore in high school, I didn't know why the heck I was made to watch that, right? That was just horrifying, and I saw no need for me to learn that. But then, years later, when my beautiful kids were born, I was like, hey, I kind of know what's about to happen. And it was kind of helpful to me in that moment, right? So that's kind of what this is. It's a detailed vision of a traumatic event that God has gifted to his people so they're ready for it, okay? He loves us, and he loves all the people who are going to suffer so greatly under the reign of King Antiochus. And so he gives them this vision so that they might endure with hope, you see. And that brings us to our final point. We'll close with this. Point number 3, the vision shows us hope. Hope. And so these prophecies are a gift of hope, not only for the saints who endured Antiochus, but also for you and for me here today. Now, how can I say that? Because we didn't endure Antiochus, right? We didn't go through Alexander the Great. How could this be for us? Well, let me show you. So, if you noticed, 3 times Daniel uses the phrase, it's Gabriel. The angel Gabriel uses the phrase, the end. The end. Did you notice that when we were reading it? Now, the most matter-of-fact way for us to interpret that kind of language is eschatologically. Eschatologically. What does that mean? It means the end times, right? The end of days. And so what scholars call this is a double prophecy. This is a double prophecy. It's one prophecy that covers 2 events, okay? It kills 2 birds with 1 stone. So, how then do we see our times and the end times in this prophecy? Well, let me help. So, in the Old Testament, there are people and practices involved throughout the Old Testament that scholars call types. Types, okay? And a type is a shadow of the substance to come, all right? A type is a pattern upon which the true substance will build in time. Now, one type that appears over and over in the Old Testament is a type of the Antichrist, okay? A type of the Antichrist. It appears over and over. There are evil powers and patterns, we saw this last week, in the world that repeat themselves throughout time, over and over again. And so, here's what that means. It means the beasts of Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 are still here. The ram and the goat are still here, doing their atrocities. Okay? That's what this means. The spirit of the Antichrist is here. And you know this. Suffering and temptation are still constant and inevitable realities for God's people today. But that's not the only type featured in this chapter. I told you this was mostly bad news, but key word is mostly. Look at verse 25 with me. Turn to verse 25. Check this out. Verse 25. It says, "He will cause deceit to prosper." This is talking about the Antichrist. "And he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince of princes. Yet he will be destroyed, not by human power." Now, do you notice that the word prince is capitalized here? Who is this prince? Well, in the very next chapter in Daniel, Daniel calls him Messiah the Prince. Messiah the Prince. And so, the forces of evil, the forces of the Antichrist, will stand against Messiah the Prince. And how would that go for them? Not good. Would not go very well for them. Hebrews 2 tells us about this attack against Messiah the Prince. The biblical writer says this. He says, "Since his children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death." Jesus is Messiah, the Prince. And his death was itself an exaltation and victory of the Son of Man lifted up to draw the sinful world to him. A decisive victory over the forces of Satan and sin and hell. At the cross, their teeth were kicked in. And unfortunately for hell, our resurrected prince will soon return to eliminate all evil once and for all. My friends, because we have here today the sure promise of Jesus' death, resurrection, ascension, and imminent return, friends, we have no fear of death. We have no fear of death. Halloween's coming, right? I like Halloween. I'll tell you why. I think it's kind of neat because it gives you and me a chance to laugh at death. It gives us a chance to join the Apostle Paul and mock it. To look death in the face and say, "Oh, death, where is your victory? Oh, death, where is your sting?" And so, hey, look, I realize it's possible, even probable, that an even bigger and badder Antiochus will come into our world. Maybe he's here right now. Maybe there's more than one. Maybe there's many. But I do know this: none of them hold a candle to King Jesus. None of them. We don't fear the boogeyman because we know the one who the boogeyman fears. One commentator I have on the book of Daniel, he says this about this chapter. He says, "At the end of days, it is not the ram or the goat who stands. It's the Lamb. The Lamb is who stands." You see, friends, this is our great hope. This is our great confidence, even in our suffering, even in our pain. We know that on the last day, our victorious Lamb will be the only one left standing. Heck, even the pagan king Nebuchadnezzar knew this. If you remember back in Daniel chapter 4, this pagan king says this. He says, his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. And so look, I don't know when the next horror will be committed on the earth. I do know that you and I experience many little horrors in our own lives every day. The presence of evil, the brokenness of our condition, the longing for home and restoration. These are present realities for each of us. But the message of Daniel is this, that our God is with us. He is with us in our suffering, and He has provided a prince, a hero for us to put our hope in. See? I told you that the book of Revelation corresponds nicely with the book of Daniel, so I read through a lot of Revelation this week, and I came across this. This is a quote from one of my commentaries I have on the book of Revelation. This is awesome. Let me just read it to you. The commentator on Revelation, he says this. He says, quote, "Between the heaven and the earth, regenerated and glorified, with the Lamb and the saints and the perpetual generations in the New Jerusalem city, the Lamb and the Lamb's bride will be all glory. Then all the holy angels will acquiesce in holy awe and respond in wonder that they knew He was great in power, but because of Jesus at Calvary, they now know the gospel and that He is also great in grace. Then all the universe will ring out the reverence of worship and the song of the final victory. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the Lamb."